Welcome to Spicy Family Scandals, where real-life drama meets hard-earned wisdom. Today's story is about betrayal, resilience, and the power of standing up for yourself. Let's dive in. The day I found out my husband had given away our house, the house I had worked myself into the ground to pay off, wasn't the day I left. It was the day I decided to destroy him. It started innocently enough. Or so I thought. I was at the bank on my lunch break, trying to finalize some paperwork for a small renovation I'd been dreaming of for years. I imagined the cozy reading nook I'd set up in the corner of the living room, the light streaming through the new bay windows. The clerk, a young man with kind eyes, furrowed his brow as he stared at his screen. "Mrs. Larkin," he said hesitantly, "I'm not sure how to tell you this, but you're not listed as the owner of the property anymore." I froze. I didn't understand. "What do you mean? I've lived in that house for 15 years. My name is on the deed." He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, lowering his voice. "It looks like it was transferred out of your name about 6 months ago, into a joint ownership. Ryan Larkin and Elissa Hartley." The world tilted under my feet. I heard a roaring in my ears, and for a moment, I thought I might pass out. Ryan and Elissa. Who the hell was Elissa Hartley? I left the bank in a haze, clutching the useless papers I had brought with me. My legs carried me back to my car on autopilot, but my brain was racing. How? Why? 6 months ago. I had just finished the final payment on the mortgage a month before that. I remembered the moment vividly. Ryan and I toasted with cheap champagne in the kitchen, laughing like we'd just conquered the world. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my confusion had hardened into rage. I stormed into the house, slamming the door behind me. Ryan was in the living room, lounging on the couch with a beer in hand, flipping through channels. He looked up at me, surprised. "Hey, babe, you're home early," he said casually, like my entire world hadn't just imploded. I dropped the papers onto the coffee table in front of him. "Care to explain this?" He frowned, glancing at the documents. For a second, I thought I saw panic flash across his face, but he recovered quickly, leaning back into the couch. "What's this about?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. "You transferred the house," I said, my voice shaking with barely contained fury. "Or house. To someone named Elissa Hartley. Who the hell is she?" Ryan's expression changed in an instant. He didn't look scared anymore, he looked smug. "You've been working so much, Ellie," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "I didn't think you'd even notice." I was stunned. I thought he'd deny it, try to lie his way out of it, but instead, he was leaning into it, like he wanted to hurt me. Like he wanted me to know. "You didn't think I'd notice that you stole our house and gave it to some woman." I spat, my voice rising. "What the hell is wrong with you, Ryan?" He stood up, towering over me. For the first time in our marriage, I felt genuinely afraid of him. Not because I thought he'd hurt me physically, but because of how deeply he'd betrayed me. "What's wrong with me?" He sneered. "What's wrong with you, Ellie? You're never here. You care more about your job than you do about me. Elissa gets me. She appreciates me." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Elissa gets you. Are you kidding me? I've spent the last decade working overtime, sacrificing everything, so we could pay off that house. For us. For our future. And you gave it away because what? You needed validation from some tramp." He smirked, and it was the most infuriating thing I'd ever seen. "Careful, Ellie. That tramp is the only reason I've put up with you for this long." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The air left my lungs, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. When I finally found my voice, it was cold and steady even as tears burned in my eyes. "Get out," I said quietly. Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me." "You heard me," I said, my voice growing stronger. "Pack your things and get the hell out of my house." He laughed, an ugly sound. "Your house? That's funny, Ellie. You don't own this house anymore." "Technically. Neither do I. It's in Elissa's name now." And just like that, the bottom fell out of my world. Ryan's smugness lingered in the air like a full stench. I couldn't stand to look at him. The betrayal itself was nauseating, but the way he seemed to relish my pain turned my stomach. For a moment, I thought about grabbing my keys and driving off. Just running away from this nightmare. But no, not yet. "Explain," I said, my voice sharp and low, cutting through the tension like a blade. How did you even manage this? How did you transfer a house I paid for? With my name on the title. He shrugged, casually sipping his beer like we were discussing the weather. It wasn't that hard. I had you sign the papers months ago. Remember that refinancing thing I told you about? You didn't even read them. The room spun. My own trust in him had become the weapon he used to betray me. My hands curled into fists at my sides. So you lied to me. You forged my signature and stole everything I worked for. Technically, he said with a smirk, I didn't forge anything. You signed it. I just didn't tell you what you were signing. There's a difference. The sheer audacity of his words sent a flash of heat through me. I wanted to scream, to throw something at him, to wipe that smirk off his face, but I forced myself to stay still. My anger wouldn't help me here. Not yet. You're a real piece of work, you know that, I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. You've ruined everything. Ryan leaned back, stretching his arms across the couch like he didn't have a care in the world. Don't be so dramatic, Ellie. You're always so serious. It's exhausting. I felt like I was staring at a stranger. This wasn't the man I thought I knew, the man I had built my life with. How long had he been this person? Had I just been blind? Or had he changed while I wasn't looking? I forced myself to focus. If he thought he could walk all over me and get away with this, he had another thing coming. But I couldn't let him see that yet. I said, crossing my arms, what's your plan now? You think I'm just going to roll over and let you and Alyssa play house in my home? Ryan chuckled, shaking his head. It's not your home anymore, Ellie. And let's be honest, you're not exactly the forgiving type. I figured you'd blow up like this, so yeah, I've been making other plans. Alyssa's got her place, and we're going to make it work. Honestly, it's a relief. You're free to do whatever you want now. Consider it a fresh start. A fresh start. Like he was doing me some kind of favor. My vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. I hope you're happy with her, I said coldly, because you just made the biggest mistake of your life. He rolled his eyes, clearly bored with the conversation. Yeah, sure. Whatever you say. I turned and left the room before I could lose control, my mind racing. I couldn't let him win. Not like this. If Ryan thought he could destroy everything I'd built and walk away unscathed, he had no idea who he was dealing with. Upstairs, I grabbed a suitcase and started throwing in clothes. My movements quick and efficient. I wouldn't stay in this house another second, but I wasn't leaving for good. Not yet. I had to regroup, to think. And when I came back, I wouldn't be empty-handed. As I zipped up the suitcase, my eyes landed on the small jewelry box on my dresser. The one with my grandmother's wedding ring inside. I hesitated for a moment, then slipped the ring into my pocket. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about taking back my life. Ryan had underestimated me, and that was his first mistake. It wouldn't be his last. As I left the house, the weight of what Ryan had done pressed against my chest like a boulder. The house that I had fought so hard for, the life I had sacrificed so much to build. It was all gone in an instant. I drove aimlessly for hours, not knowing where I was going, until I finally found myself in the parking lot of a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. The receptionist barely glanced at me as I handed over my credit card. I think she saw something in my face, though, because when she gave me the key, she added softly, "It'll get better, hon. Just take it one day at a time." Her kindness almost broke me, but I couldn't afford to fall apart. Not yet. I needed a plan. The room was small and smelled faintly of mildew, but it was quiet, and that was all I needed. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the cracked wallpaper, my mind racing. How had I missed the signs? Ryan and I hadn't been perfect, but I never thought he was capable of this. And Alyssa? Who was she? How long had they been planning this? I opened my laptop and began searching for answers. It didn't take long to find her. Alyssa Hartley's social media profiles were public, and they painted a picture that made my blood boil. She was younger than me, maybe late 20s, with an Instagram feed full of designer handbags, beach vacations, and romantic dinners. In one post, she was wearing a bracelet I recognized. It was part of the anniversary gift I had given Ryan last year. The caption read, "When he says he's finally ready to make you his number one, blessed new beginnings." I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. This wasn't just some fling. Alyssa thought she'd won. She thought she'd taken everything from me, but she didn't know me. The next morning, I went to see a lawyer. I expected her to tell me there was nothing I could do, but instead, she leaned back in her chair, a sly smile playing on her lips. "Your husband really thought he could get away with this," she said, shaking her head. "He's in for a rude awakening." It turned out Ryan had made several critical mistakes. While I had signed the transfer papers, there were irregularities in the way the documents were filed, enough to challenge their validity. More importantly, the money I had used to pay off the mortgage had come solely from my income, meaning I had a strong case to claim the house as marital property. "But it's not just about the house, is it?" the lawyer asked, her sharp eyes studying me. "What do you really want?" "Ellie, what did I want?" I thought about the years I had spent working late, the promotions I had turned down, the friends I had lost touch with. All because I believed in the future Ryan and I were building together. He had taken that future and handed it to someone else on a silver platter. "I want him to lose," I said finally, my voice steady. "I want him to feel what it's like to have everything ripped away from him." The lawyer nodded. "Then, let's get to work." Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into the fight. I moved out of the motel and stayed with my sister, Lisa, who was livid when she heard what Ryan had done. "I always knew he was a snake," she said, handing me a glass of wine. "But this is a whole new level of low." I didn't tell Lisa everything, though. Not yet. I didn't tell her about the private investigator I had hired to dig into Ryan's finances. I didn't tell her about the anonymous tip I'd sent to his employer, hinting at inappropriate conduct. And I definitely didn't tell her about the plan I was forming in the back of my mind. A plan that would make sure Ryan and Alyssa's new life together crumbled before it even began. For now, I played the role of the wronged wife. I let Ryan think I was defeated, that I had given up. But every time he called to gloat, every time Alyssa posted another smug picture online, my resolve grew stronger. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. A month after I left the house, Ryan still hadn't figured out what was coming for him. His arrogance blinded him, and I used that to my advantage. Every phone call from him followed the same pattern: smugness, condescension, and thinly veiled triumph. "How's that motel treating you, Ellie?" He'd sneer. "Maybe next time you'll appreciate the importance of a real partnership." Partnership. The word almost made me laugh, but I didn't bite. I stayed calm, gave him nothing. He mistook my silence for weakness. Meanwhile, the private investigator I had hired, a wary man named Don, who had a knack for uncovering secrets, was working miracles. The first thing he uncovered was that Ryan and Alyssa had opened a joint account, which they were using to funnel money. My money. To fund their new life. "She's spending like a lottery winner," Don told me during one of our late-night meetings at a diner. "Jewelry, designer clothes, some kind of retreat in Mexico. Your husband's footing the bill, but it's not his money, it's yours." I gritted my teeth, my anger simmering just below the surface. "Can we trace it back? Prove it was taken from our marital assets?" Don nodded. "Absolutely. But that's not all." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were photos, grainy but clear enough. Alyssa wasn't just spending my money. She was cheating on Ryan with someone else. The man in the photos was younger, muscular, with a flashy sports car that screamed mid-life crisis. In one picture, he had his arm around Alyssa's waist. In another, they were kissing outside a bar. I stared at the images, my emotions swirling. A part of me wanted to laugh at the irony. Ryan had blown up our marriage for this woman, only to be played for a fool. But I wasn't ready to let him off the hook just yet. "This is perfect," I said, my mind racing. "Make sure we have everything in order. I want airtight proof." Don grinned. "Already ahead of you." With Don's evidence in hand, I began laying the groundwork for my revenge. The first step was the court case. My lawyer filed a petition challenging the transfer of the house, citing fraud and misrepresentation. Ryan didn't take it seriously at first, until he was served with the papers. He called me that night, furious. "What the hell is this, Ellie?" he barked. "You're trying to take the house back. You signed the papers. This is a waste of time." "Funny," I said coolly. "That's exactly what my lawyer said about your defense." "You won't win," he snapped. "We'll see." I hung up before he could say another word. The second step was more personal. I created a fake social media profile. Nothing too obvious, just a woman with a generic name and a few harmless posts. Using this account, I started messaging Elisa, posing as someone who'd accidentally stumbled across her pictures with her new boyfriend. "Wow, you guys are such a cute couple. How long have you been together?" She responded within minutes, gushing about her new man and how he was such an upgrade from her last relationship. She even sent a picture of them at some upscale restaurant, toasting with champagne. I saved everything. The final piece of the puzzle was Ryan's job. Thanks to Dawn's research, I knew that he'd been skimming funds from his department's budget at work to cover his own expenses. It wasn't a huge amount, just enough to slip under the radar, but I had enough documentation to raise eyebrows. I sent the evidence anonymously to his company's HR department, along with a note. "You might want to take a closer look at Ryan Larkin's expense reports. Some of the numbers don't add up." The fallout was swift. Ryan was called into a disciplinary meeting within days. He tried to bluff his way out of it, but the evidence was too damning. They put him on unpaid leave while they conducted an investigation. When he called me, his voice was panicked for the first time. "Ellie, I need your help," he said, his tone desperate. "They're saying I misused company funds. It's not true. You know I wouldn't do that, right?" I leaned back in my chair, savoring the moment. "Sorry, Ryan. I guess you'll have to figure this one out on your own. Isn't that what you wanted? A fresh start?" His silence was delicious. By the end of the month, the cracks in Ryan and Alyssa's relationship were starting to show. The court case was progressing, his job was hanging by a thread, and Alyssa was spending more time with her new boyfriend than with him. I kept feeding the chaos, one calculated move at a time, until Ryan's world began to crumble. He still didn't know it was me pulling the strings. But he would. A week before the court hearing, Ryan finally hit his breaking point. He showed up at my sister Lisa's house, pounding on the door like a madman. Lisa peeked through the curtains and cursed under her breath. "It's him," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. I put down my coffee and calmly stood up. "Let him in." Lisa's eyes widened. "Are you sure? Because I swear to God, Allie, if I've got this." I interrupted, my voice steady. "Trust me." Reluctantly, Lisa opened the door. Ryan stormed in, his face flushed with anger. He looked terrible, disheveled, unshaven, and desperate. The man who once strutted around with smug confidence now looked like he hadn't slept in days. "What the hell are you doing, Ellie?" he shouted, his voice cracking. "You're trying to ruin me." I folded my arms and leaned casually against the kitchen counter. "Oh, Ryan," I said, tilting my head. "I think you've done a pretty good job of that all by yourself." "You think this is funny?" he snapped, slamming his hand on the table. "I lost my job because of you. Alyssa's been acting weird ever since you filed that stupid lawsuit. And now the bank's calling about frozen accounts. What the hell is going on?" I took a sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch. "Let me make sure I've got this straight," I said finally. "You're upset because your mistress is pulling away, your finances are falling apart, and you're under investigation at work. Did I miss anything?" Ryan glared at me, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought he might break a tooth. "I knew you were petty, but you're trying to destroy my life." I set my mug down and took a step closer to him. "Destroy your life? Ryan, you destroyed mine first. You lied to me. You stole from me. You gave the house I worked years to pay off to some gold-digging tramp." His face turned red with anger, but before he could respond, I continued. "You wanted a fresh start, didn't you?" I said, my voice rising. "Well, congratulations, Ryan. You've got it. No job, no house, no girlfriend. Looks like you're really living the dream." For a moment, I thought he might lunge at me. Lisa must have thought the same thing, because she stepped forward, positioning herself between us. "You need to leave," Lisa said firmly, her tone leaving no room for argument. But Ryan didn't move. Instead, he laughed. Bitter, hollow sound. "You think you've won, don't you? But I know how this ends. You'll drag this out in court, waste all your money, and you'll still lose. You're nothing without me, Ellie." Those words hit me harder than I expected, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I gave him a cold smile. "We'll see about that." Ryan finally left, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Lisa turned to me, her face full of concern. Are you okay? I nodded, but I didn't sit back down. My heart was pounding, and I could feel the adrenaline coursing through me. Ryan was unraveling, but I couldn't afford to get complacent. Later that night, I got a call from Don. I've got something big, he said, his voice tinged with excitement. You're going to want to sit down for this. What is it? I asked, gripping the phone tightly. Remember how I told you Alyssa was cheating on Ryan? Well, it turns out her boyfriend isn't just some random guy, he's a real estate developer, one with a history of shady deals. My stomach tightened. And it looks like Alyssa's been planning to flip the house. She's already had appraisers come by and everything. She's just waiting for the court case to settle before she puts it on the market. The audacity of it all made my blood boil. Alyssa and her new boyfriend had been using Ryan just as much as he'd used me. Send me everything you have, I said. You got it. Oh, and one more thing, Don added. I pulled some records on her boyfriend. Turns out he's been involved in a couple of lawsuits. Fraud, embezzlement, you name it. If you play your cards right, this could get messy for them both. A slow smile spread across my face. Thanks, Don. I owe you one. As I hung up, a new plan began to form in my mind. Alyssa thought she was untouchable, and Ryan was too blinded by his own ego to see he was being played. But I wasn't going to let either of them walk away unscathed. By the time I was done, they'd both wish they'd never met me. The court hearing arrived faster than I expected. I walked into the courtroom with my lawyer, ready for the showdown. Ryan sat on the other side of the room, his face a mask of irritation. Alyssa wasn't with him, which surprised me. I'd assumed she'd show up to play the supportive girlfriend role. The proceedings started with the usual formalities, but it didn't take long for things to heat up. My lawyer presented the evidence of fraud. The irregularities in the title transfer, the timeline of the transactions, and, most damning of all, proof that Ryan had misled me about the documents I had signed. Ryan's lawyer tried to argue that I had signed the papers willingly, but it was a weak defense. The judge didn't seem impressed. When it was Ryan's turn to speak, he stood up, adjusting his tie like he was trying to reclaim some of his lost confidence. Your Honor, he began, this is nothing more than a bitter attempt by my ex to drag me down because she can't accept that I've moved on. I kept my face neutral, but inside, I was seething. He was still trying to paint himself as the victim. But then my lawyer stood up, her expression sharp. Your Honor, if I may, I'd like to present new evidence. The judge nodded, and she handed over the folder Dawn had prepared. Inside were photos of Alyssa with her new boyfriend, the appraisal documents for the house, and a detailed timeline showing how Alyssa had been planning to sell the property behind Ryan's back. This evidence, my lawyer said, her voice steady and calm, shows that Mr. Larkin's actions were not only fraudulent but part of a larger scheme orchestrated by his mistress, Miss Hartley. It appears she had no intention of maintaining ownership of the house and was, instead, planning to sell it for personal profit. The courtroom fell silent. Ryan's face turned pale, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. The judge frowned, flipping through the documents. Mr. Larkin, do you have anything to say about this? Ryan stammered, his composure crumbling. I didn't know. This is the first I'm hearing of it. Your Honor, my lawyer interjected. And you also have evidence that Mr. Larkin misused marital funds to finance his relationship with Ms. Hartley. I'd like to call attention to the bank statements we submitted earlier. The judge nodded, his expression growing more severe. This is highly irregular. Mr. Larkin, I suggest you take this very seriously. If the allegations against you are proven, there could be significant consequences. Ryan sank back into his chair, his confidence shattered. The hearing ended with the judge ordering a temporary freeze on the property and all associated accounts while the investigation continued. It wasn't a final victory, but it was a step in the right direction. As I left the courtroom, Ryan caught up to me in the hallway. He looked furious, his face red and his jaw tight. What the hell are you doing, Ellie? He hissed. You're ruining my life. I turned to him, my expression calm but cold. No, Ryan. I'm holding you accountable. There's a difference. His hands balled into fists at his sides. You think you've won. This isn't over. I'll fight you every step of the way. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. You might want to save your energy, because when this is over, there won't be anything left for you to fight for. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything, my lawyer appeared at my side. Ellie, we should go, she said firmly, glaring at Ryan. I nodded and walked away without looking back. That night, I got another call from Don. You're not going to believe this, he said, his tone almost gleeful. What now? I asked, bracing myself. Elisa and her boyfriend, they've been hit with a lawsuit. Turns out, one of the properties they flipped last year was sold with falsified inspection reports. The buyer's suing them for damages. I couldn't help but laugh. It was poetic justice. Elisa was too busy dealing with her own mess to play the supportive girlfriend for Ryan. As I hung up, I felt a sense of clarity. The pieces were falling into place. Ryan had underestimated me. Elisa had overplayed her hand, and now they were both facing the consequences of their actions. But I wasn't done yet. Not until I had taken back everything they had stolen from me. And then some. The real turning point came 2 weeks later, when I got an unexpected call from a woman named Denise. Her voice was shaky, hesitant, like she was trying to decide if she could trust me. Don't know how to say this, she began, but I think we have something in common. I've been following what's happening with your court case. I paused, unsure what to make of it. Who are you? I'm Ryan's ex-girlfriend, she said, her voice thick with bitterness. From before he met you, and I think it's time you heard the truth about what he's really capable of. I gripped the phone tightly, my heart pounding. Go on. Denise told me a story that made my stomach churn. Years ago, Ryan had pulled a similar stunt with her, convincing her to invest in a property under the guise of building a life together, only to leave her high and dry when the deal fell through. He'd siphoned money from her account, ruined her credit, and disappeared without a trace. She had tried to take legal action, but Ryan had been careful to leave no paper trail. I lost everything because of him, Denise said, her voice breaking. When I saw your case in the news, I knew it was him. I couldn't just stay silent. By the time we ended the call, my mind was racing. Ryan wasn't just a cheating husband. He was a serial manipulator, preying on women to fund his own selfish ambitions. And now, I had a witness who could expose him for what he really was. I immediately called my lawyer and relayed everything Denise had told me. She was thrilled. If Denise is willing to testify, this changes everything. It establishes a pattern of behavior and strengthens your case. But we'll need to corroborate her story. That's when I realized I still had one ace up my sleeve, the private investigator. I called Don and told him about Denise. I'll dig into it, he promised. If there's dirt on Ryan's past, I'll find it. While Don worked his magic, I focused on my next move. Confronting Elisa. I wasn't naive enough to think she'd suddenly grow a conscience, but if I could rattle her, maybe she'd make a mistake. I found her at a boutique downtown, trying on a necklace that cost more than my monthly salary. She didn't notice me at first, too busy preening in front of the mirror. When I stepped into her line of sight, her smile froze. Ellie, she said, her tone dripping with fox politeness. What a surprise. I smiled sweetly. Elisa, that necklace is lovely. Is Ryan still paying for your shopping sprees? Or has your new boyfriend taken over? Or her eyes narrowed, but she quickly recovered. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I think you do, I said, stepping closer. See, I know all about your little side piece, and I know you've been planning to flip the house. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Her mask slipped for just a moment, a flicker of panic crossing her face. You're delusional, she snapped. Ryan gave me that house fair and square. It's mine now. I leaned in, lowering my voice. You might want to check with your boyfriend about that. Word is, he's got a history of lawsuits. Fraud, embezzlement, sound familiar. Her jaw tightened, and I could see the cracks forming in her façade. You're bluffing. Am I said, my tone icy. Maybe you should ask Ryan what happens when people cross me. Or better yet, ask his former employer. They've got plenty to say about him these days. Elisa's face turned pale, but she quickly turned her back on me, pretending to admire a pair of earrings. This conversation is over, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I walked out of the store, satisfaction bubbling in my chest. Alyssa was unraveling, and I knew it was only a matter of time before she and Ryan turned on each other. That night, Dawn called with more good news. "Ellie, you're not going to believe this. I found a paper trail connecting Ryan to another shady deal, one that lines up with Denise's story. Bank transfers, fake shell companies, the works." He paused, his tone growing serious. "This isn't just about the house anymore. If you push this, you could ruin him. Completely." I stared out the window, the city lights twinkling in the distance. "Then let's push," I said. The endgame was in sight, and I was ready to take Ryan down for good. The morning of the next court date, I walked into the courthouse with a renewed sense of purpose. Everything was finally coming together. My lawyer had worked tirelessly to integrate Denise's testimony, Dawn's evidence, and the financial inconsistencies Ryan had left in his wake. This wasn't just a case about a house anymore. It was about exposing the depths of Ryan's deception. Ryan looked worse than ever. His once pristine suits were replaced by something that seemed hastily pressed, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He avoided my gaze. His shoulders hunched as though the weight of his lies was finally bearing down on him. Alyssa wasn't with him. In fact, she hadn't shown up since the last hearing. I suspected her absence was deliberate. Things had been suspiciously quiet on her end, and I knew it wasn't because she'd grown a conscience. More likely, she was trying to distance herself from Ryan before his sinking ship dragged her under. The hearing began, and my lawyer wasted no time presenting the new evidence. Denise testified first, recounting how Ryan had manipulated her in much the same way he had manipulated me. Her voice wavered at times, but her determination was palpable. "He's a con man," she said, her gaze fixed on the judge. "He preys on women, uses their trust to get what he wants, and then leaves them to clean up the mess." Ryan squirmed in his seat, his lawyer visibly sweating. The evidence Dawn had uncovered followed, painting a damning picture of Ryan's financial misdeeds. The judge's frown deepened with each new revelation. By the time my lawyer rested her case, the courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. Ryan's lawyer stumbled through a weak defense, claiming that the accusations were exaggerated and that Ryan's actions had been misunderstood. Then Ryan himself took the stand. He tried to look composed, but his voice betrayed him, trembling as he spoke. "Your Honor, I admit I made mistakes," he said, attempting to muster some semblance of sincerity. "But I never meant to hurt anyone. I was just trying to make things right for myself." I almost laughed out loud. Even now, he couldn't admit the truth. When the hearing adjourned for the day, Ryan approached me in the hallway. His face was pale, and for the first time, there was no trace of arrogance. "Ellie," he began, his voice low, "look, this has gone too far. We don't need to keep dragging this out. Let's settle this privately, just between us. I'll give you some money, and we can put all of this behind us." I stared at him, my expression unreadable. "You think this is about money?" I said, my voice cold. "You took everything from me, Ryan. You don't get to decide when this ends." He clenched his jaw, his desperation morphing into anger. "Fine. Do whatever you want. But don't think for a second that you're going to come out of this unscathed." I stepped closer, my voice a low hiss. "You should worry about yourself. Because when this is over, you won't have anything left to lose." That night, as I reviewed the day's events with my lawyer, I got a text from Dawn. "Dawn, Alyssa's been busy. She sold the house 2 days ago. Cash deal. Buyer's anonymous, but I'm digging into it." My blood ran cold. She had gone behind everyone's back. Ryan, the court, and me, to offload the house before the judge could rule. It was a brazen, reckless move, and it reeked of desperation. My lawyer looked furious when I told her. "This could blow up in her face," she said. "If the sale was made without proper clearance, the buyer could sue, and it'll implicate her in fraud. We need to act fast." Over the next few days, Dawn's investigation revealed the truth. The buyer wasn't just anyone. It was Alyssa's boyfriend, the shady real estate developer. He had purchased the house under a shell corporation to avoid detection. The revelation was almost too good to be true. Ryan and Alyssa were in deeper than I'd ever anticipated, and their alliance was already crumbling under the pressure. By the time the final court date arrived, I was ready for whatever came next. The judge ruled in my favor, declaring the transfer of the house void due to fraud and misrepresentation. The sale to Alyssa's boyfriend was deemed illegal, and the property was placed back under my name. But it wasn't just about the house anymore. The court also ordered a full audit of Ryan's finances, opening the door to potential criminal charges. As I walked out of the courthouse, the weight I had been carrying for months finally began to lift. I had won, but the story wasn't over yet. Ryan and Alyssa had destroyed everything they touched, and now they were left with nothing but the mess they had created. And me. I had my house, my dignity, and a renewed sense of purpose. The revenge had cost me dearly, but in the end, it was worth every second. With the house back in my name, I expected Ryan to slink away in defeat. Instead, he went on a rampage. It was almost pitiful to watch. Almost. He tried to appeal the court's decision, claiming I had orchestrated the entire case out of spite. He even hinted that I had fabricated evidence. His desperation was palpable, and the legal system wasn't buying it. But Ryan wasn't the type to go down quietly. 3 days after the ruling, Lisa called me in a panic. "Illy, he's here?" she said, her voice tight. "He's outside my house, yelling like a lunatic. Do you want me to call the cops?" "No," I said, grabbing my keys. "I'll handle it." When I arrived, Ryan was pacing on Lisa's front lawn, shouting into his phone. His words were a jumbled mix of threats and complaints, but when he saw my car pull up, he ended the call abruptly and turned to face me. "Ellie," he said, his voice raw. "We need to talk." I crossed my arms, keeping my distance. "What could we possibly have to talk about, Ryan? You lost. It's over." "It's not over," he said, stepping closer. "You've ruined my life, Ellie. My job, my reputation, my relationship, everything. Do you even realize what you've done?" I met his glare with a cold stare. "What I've done? You did this to yourself, Ryan. You stole from me, lied to me, humiliated me. You thought you could just walk away, but guess what? Actions have consequences." He let out a bitter laugh. "You're so self-righteous, aren't you? Always playing the victim. Do you even care how much damage you've caused?" I took a step forward, my voice steady. "You're the one who chose to betray me. You're the one who lied, cheated, and stole. Don't you dare try to shift the blame onto me." His face contorted with rage. "You think you're better than me, Ellie. You're not. You're just as vindictive and petty as I am." For a moment, I felt a flicker of doubt. Had I gone too far? Was I becoming the person Ryan wanted me to be? A bitter, vengeful shell of my former self. But then I remembered everything he had taken from me, and the doubt disappeared. "This conversation is over," I said firmly. "Jet off Lisa's property or I'll call the police." Ryan stared at me, his fists clenched, but he didn't move. "Now, Ryan," I said, my voice like ice. Finally, he turned and stormed off, muttering under his breath. As he disappeared down the street, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Lisa came out of the house, looking shaken. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded, but I knew I couldn't let my guard down. Ryan was unraveling, and desperate people were dangerous. The next day, I got a call from Don. "You're not going to believe this," he said, his tone grim. "Ryan's been busy. He filed for bankruptcy this morning, claiming the house ruling left him financially ruined." I frowned. "Can he do that?" "It's a stall tactic," Don explained. "He's hoping it'll tie up the property in legal limbo, so you can't sell it or make any changes. But that's not all. I also found out he's been trying to dig up dirt on you, contacting old coworkers, even sniffing around your finances." The audacity of it all left me momentarily speechless. "He doesn't know when to quit, does he?" "Apparently not," Don said. "But don't worry. We've got enough on him to keep the upper hand. Just be careful. He's cornered, and that makes him unpredictable." I thanked Don and hung up, a sense of unease settling over me. Ryan's moves were reckless and transparent, but they were also dangerous. He was playing a game he couldn't win, and I had no intention of letting him drag me down with him. But there was one last card I needed to play. Alyssa had been conspicuously silent throughout all of this, which meant she was either lying low or plotting her next move. Either way, I wasn't about to let her slip away unscathed. I reached out to the lawyer handling the lawsuit against Alyssa and her boyfriend. I offered my full cooperation, providing every piece of evidence Dawn had gathered about her involvement in the fraudulent house sale. The lawyer was thrilled. "This is exactly what we needed," she said. "With your testimony, we can build a solid case against her. Ryan and Alyssa thought they could outmaneuver me, but they had underestimated just how far I was willing to go. By the time this was over, they'd have nothing left. Not the house, not their reputations, not even each other. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of calm. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was winning, and there was no turning back. The day I closed the door on Ryan and Alyssa for good felt nothing like I expected. There wasn't a dramatic showdown or a grand declaration of victory. It was quiet, almost anticlimactic, a calm after the storm that had consumed my life for months. But in that quiet, I found clarity. The court proceedings wrapped up swiftly. Ryan's bankruptcy ploy failed spectacularly. The judge saw it for what it was. Desperate attempt to delay the inevitable. The house remained legally mine, and his financial mismanagement became the final nail in his coffin. Meanwhile, Alyssa's involvement in the fraudulent sale of the house caught up with her. The lawsuit against her and her boyfriend escalated, and she disappeared from Ryan's life without so much as a goodbye. I heard later that Ryan had moved back in with his parents, utterly defeated. Alyssa was reportedly trying to salvage her reputation in another city, but the lawsuits had left her drowning in debt. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel the weight of it all. The betrayal, the fight, and the victory. I stood in the house I had fought so hard to reclaim. It was empty now, stripped of the furniture and memories that once made it a home, but it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like a blank canvas. Lisa came over that evening with a bottle of wine. We sat on the floor of the living room, the soft glow of the setting sun streaming through the windows. "So what now?" she asked, pouring us each a glass. I smiled, a genuine smile I hadn't felt in a long time. "Now I start over. On my terms." Lisa raised her glass. "To new beginnings." As I sipped the wine, I thought about the life I'd left behind and the woman I'd become. Ryan's betrayal had broken something in me, but it had also forced me to rebuild. I learned to stand up for myself, to fight for what was mine, and to let go of the things and people that no longer served me. The house was never the dream. The dream was a life filled with love, respect, and purpose. Things Ryan could never give me because he didn't value them himself. I sold the house a month later. The money allowed me to take a sabbatical from work, travel, and figure out what I wanted next. I didn't rush the process. For once, I let myself just be. If there's one thing I want other women to know, it's this: life doesn't end when someone betrays you. It begins. Because once you've walked through fire, you realize how strong you truly are. The fight for the house wasn't just about bricks and mortar. It was about reclaiming my power. And as I stood on the other side of it all, I knew I would never let anyone take that from me again.